Can everyone see the presentation now? Brilliant, fantastic. So yeah, thanks for the introduction. Yeah, as Tate was saying, I was at 38 Degrees for kind of about 6 years in a few different roles. And then the last kind of year and a half, I've been freelancing, working with quite a few organizations on this sort of stuff. So a lot of the yeah, sort of examples I'll be talking about drawn from a mixture of 38 Degrees and some other organizations, but I'm not mentioning any specifically by name, just to yeah, kind of make it more easily for people to share and hopefully publicize this. So in terms of structure, here's essentially what I'm going to cover. Should be about half an hour, and then yeah, plenty of time for questions at the end, but feel free to jump in because I think that's the best time to ask questions. So first we'll start off talking about this sort of like dead weight or members on ice that every email list accumulates, kind of who makes that up, why people fall into this category. Then talk briefly about why I guess it's worth caring about that, why not just ignore it, why not just leave them there. And then talk a bit more specifically about a strategy for dealing with members on ice and what that might involve. Talking about the implementation, what the different sort of stages of that would be, and kind of the effects that I've seen in different organizations. And then finally, a bit of sort of like getting started 101 if you don't already have a sort of members on ice strategy or you want to implement a new one, what the sort of basic things that you might want to start doing are, and a few sort of pointers there. So to begin with, yeah, who makes up this kind of dead weight? So I guess it's an unfortunate reality of having an email list that although you might have 1 million or 5 million or however many people you have as your kind of vanity stat of your email list size, a lot of people are just not opening those emails. And that means that, yeah, you're not necessarily engaging them. And there's a whole lot of reasons why people might be sitting there on your email list, not opening. There's people who essentially just signed up to the organization because they saw a petition shared on Facebook, but they don't really have any further interest in it, or that you haven't shown them a reason to be interested in it. There's also people who, you know, are using a fake email address or an old email address that they never check anymore, one from their old job, like that kind of stuff. I'm sure lots of people had old Hotmail email addresses that they were a bit embarrassed about, that, you know, they might still stick in a petition form. Another reason, of course, is that you might be going into spam, or you might be going into a promotions tab or something like that that people don't check. A lot of people might say, I keep meaning to read your emails, but I just kind of never quite get around to it. And yeah, as I said, they may have changed their email address. And there's probably other reasons as well. But fundamentally, you're sending them emails and they're not reading them. So just to give a snapshot of what this kind of might, how big this kind of problem might be, this is some data from a few years ago on a couple of email lists, sort of looking at, yeah, the sort of percentage of people in any given month. So this is probably receiving 6 to 8 emails over a month. For only 43% of the people on this list were kind of like opening any of those emails. So that meant that you were sending, you know, lots and lots of emails to people, and a huge big chunk of them are just, yeah, not engaging with them. There's also, it's also worth noting that the sort of active membership, so your people who are regularly taking action, it doesn't necessarily correspond exactly to the people that are opening your emails. And this can be, you know, depending on your list, a more or less significant chunk. So when we talk about members on ICE, I'm generally talking about email engagement only. not necessarily engagement with your website or with your activity. And so you can have like, I mean, in the example I've given here, this is a list where about 7% of the people who are part of the kind of regularly taking action group that are taking action at least once a month and putting an email address in the form, nevertheless, are never opening those emails. And if you look more closely at the source data, you can see that they're actually coming to the site via Facebook or coming by other means that we can't necessarily determine, but they're certainly not clicking links in emails. And so you want to be careful. I've seen organizations kind of like get slightly confused about the distinction between these two, and then you end up excluding people or treating people as inactive who actually are perfectly active. They just don't like the email channel. And so this is, worth thinking about as part of a sort of more multi-channel approach. That this is mostly an email specific kind of like problem, which I'll sort of go on to maybe why that is a little bit later. So yeah, I guess why care? It's nice to have a big vanity stat that says you've got 5 million people that you're emailing. Like, why not just leave it like that? I guess there's 3 kind of main reasons, potentially more. I guess the first and probably I would say the most pressing one for any organization that really relies on email is deliverability. So making sure that your emails are arriving in the inbox and are being placed in the right kind of the right tab so that people are seeing those. Obviously, different email providers use different algorithms in order to filter. But certainly like one that is important is sort of the engagement of people with your email content. And you can kind of assume that if you're sending lots of emails that are being opened and they can see that you are a sender and from your IP addresses that lots of email are landing and you're maybe only getting an open rate of 10% or something on those, that could appear kind of like low quality content that people are not that interested in. And so as you send more emails, they're likely to put those into a less favorable position or indeed filter them out totally. And so I'll talk about this a little bit later, but we did do some experiments with changing the order. So we basically tried sending some emails one week that were we just sent randomly to a chunk of the list. And then we sent some emails subsequent weeks that we ordered the order in which the email was sent out at was ordered by the highest openers, like the most active email engagers, down to the lowest. And it's hard to compare exactly because you're not doing an A/B test as such, but we certainly observed that the kind of full list open rate on the latter ones was a bit higher by like a couple of percentage points, so like sort of 20% to 22%. And you wouldn't necessarily, you'd want to do more testing to really sort of confirm that, but you can sort of, an explanation is that by getting lots of engagement early on in the email send, then similar emails that arrive later are treated more favorably.
This is Aaron from Swing Left. Quick question there to just make sure I understand that. So did you do random versus like an engagement scaffold like that, or did you play with the order of the scaffold? Like, did you go from most engaged to least engaged versus least engaged to most engaged? That kind of information.
It was just random compared to the kind of going from most engaged to least engaged. We didn't test out the other way. But that would actually be quite a good way to sort of see if you can harm your deliverability by sending the other way, or potentially a dangerous game to play as well.
Yeah.
And does it have to be? This is Ethan from Swing Left. Does it have to be a single email? Like what we've been doing is like segmenting more. Like, we'll send this to a higher engagement group and then a lower engagement group. Is there advantage in terms of having that be a single staggered send, like how they look at it?
I don't believe so, no. I mean, I think the main advantage is just that it's less admin for your campaigners to put together if you can kind of automate that. But from the perspective of an email provider, that's going to look the same. Like the headers on the email are going to be the same. The kind of like content's going to be the same.
I guess the question is, are they looking at senders or like an email itself? Are they going to judge different emails differently by the different engagement rates you're getting?
I mean, from what they say publicly, it's kind of a mixture of like how the content of an individual email is being engaged with, and the sender reputation, and the historical kind of like interactions that people have, which is why, you know, deliverability is not like about an individual email, it's about a reputation that you build with the different email providers over time. So that's deliverability, really big factor there in terms of keeping your kind of list clean and not necessarily sending as many emails to people. The next thing as well is cost. Like it depends on kind of how you're sending your emails, but even if you're using something like Amazon SES, which is one of the cheapest ways to kind of like send bulk emails, if you're sending, I did some calculations here, like if your email list is 1 million people and you're doing 8 sends a month, then if you just send to half of those, you can send $400 a month. If you're using something like Nation Builder, which charges you by the number of subscribed emails that you have, then the savings could potentially be like a lot bigger there as well. If you are able to kind of reduce down the kind of like subscribed size of the list essentially. And then, so finally, the opportunity to re-engage people. There's probably within this big chunk of people that aren't opening emails, there's going to be some people that, you know, would be great members, would take lots of action, would donate money, but, you know, they've just kind of formed a habit really of not engaging with your emails. And so you want to try and find a way to get them back. And this was just a little graph kind of explaining how you essentially get diminishing returns the longer people kind of sit on your list, not opening your emails. So this is looking at, say, like 50 days, 100 days, 150 days after people first join your list somehow, and the number that kind of eventually open it. So you can see, like, after 50 days, you're really talking about, 80% of the people that are ever going to open the email have already opened it. After 100 days, you're getting up to more like 85, 90%. And so, that's another sort of, I guess, reason that people are worried about kind of not sending people emails or unsubscribing people, is that they're thinking, oh, but there's this huge pool of people that has so much potential, like, should we really write them off? And, you know, the reality is that probably if they've been sitting there not doing much for a long time, they're unlikely to, like, ever kind of like really re-engage, or at least the return on investment is a lot lower than your main list. So now talk a little bit about sort of strategy for sort of dealing with this kind of dead weight members on ICE on your list. So as I said before, we've got 3 key goals: improve deliverability, reduce costs by sending less emails, and try and re-engage people who are no longer reading your emails. So this is kind of like in various versions, kind of has been implemented in quite a few different organizations. Certainly something we kind of like did at 38 Degrees. Essentially what this involves is sort of defining a new level of sort of subscription, somewhere between sort of like your full email list and being completely unsubscribed. The way you could set this up, for example, is you sort of say that people who aren't opening emails, you're going to stop sending them emails, or you're going to put them into this sort of holding pen after 6 months of not opening any emails. However, you might say that actually your kind of new members that have only taken one action, haven't re-engaged, you might add those more quickly because, again, going back to the graph that I was showing just before, the drop off, the time as time passes, then they are less likely to become active. And then what you don't just write these people off, you're not unsubscribing them, but what you are doing is treating them differently, and you're going to send them more targeted content in order to try and re-engage them. And then you might also define some period of time after which actually you say the return on emailing these people is so low relative to the harm and deliverability and the cost of sending them emails that it's just not worth it kind of anymore. In terms of re-engagement content, now, this is obviously, you can only decide this from like thinking about your list and testing out different things with your list. But like common things that you might want to use would be things that are going to be more relevant to the person, that's going to make the person sort of like see something in their inbox that is, just grabs their attention in a way that maybe they've been kind of ignoring for a little while. So things like that. I've had big success with things that are local, that are relevant to the place in which someone lives. Like if you get something about, your kind of like town or whatever, and it's in the subject line there, that's probably going to prick up your ears a little bit, that more than just a regular email. And you might want to experiment with not just changing the subject line, but also changing like the sender name to reference like the local place as well. And related to that, thinking about their action history. So if they joined on a particular campaign, about net neutrality, for example, and then they haven't received anything on that for a while, then maybe if you don't send them emails for a little while, but then the next big net neutrality thing that comes up, they kind of get that email, then again, it's relevant to them, their action history, their association with the organization, and that, could also work well.
James, let me interrupt just a second. Ethan asked another question by chat. Ethan, that may have been addressed there, but James, go ahead and give that a read real quickly.
Sorry. Yeah. How do I can't actually see the chat.
Oh, then I will read it, right? Because you're
screen share view.
Or unless Ethan, do you want to ask the question?
Just basically you talk about targeting and grouping folks on the basis of opens. I'm wondering if you think about that all in terms of clicks as well, in terms of defining a group.
Opens are slightly, not always 100% accurate, depending on how the email program is set up, the email provider. So in terms of stuff that would remove someone from the members and I segment and kind of reinstate them into like full email list, I would look at the clicks as well. Because obviously if someone's clicking in an email, then they have to be opening it. But in terms of taking people out that aren't clicking emails, I don't know, I think because we're interested mostly in deliverability, I think if people are regularly opening the emails and reading them, then I wouldn't worry too much about their kind of like them not clicking. Like they might just be reading because they like knowing what's going on, and one day they will click. And I don't think it's going to harm deliverability to have a chunk of people sitting there opening emails. It's really the lack of opening that I would kind of be worried about.
So when they think about engagement rates, it's really in terms of opens, not in terms of clicks in the email?
Yeah, for this, obviously, when comparing different actions together and comparing emails and all that kind of stuff, then click rates and action rates are probably like as important, if not more important. But in terms of, this sort of like list health and sort of deliverability, I'd focus more on the open rate. Cool. And yeah, so talked about local things that are related to their action history. The final thing would be things that are, just very topical and performing kind of like well on the full list. So if you have an email that's, 50% above average for its kind of engagement, then that might be an opportunity to send again to your kind of members on ICE and see if they, are engaged more. So talking a little more practically now, I guess what I'd like to talk first about is you need to implement something like this, I guess. It's not going to be exactly the same because every organization is going to be different, and your balance of like cost versus deliverability and all that kind of stuff might be different, but you essentially need to decide on some cutoff points. So how like what is members on ICE member, what do they look like? Is it 6 months not opening? Is it 9 months not opening? Do you want to treat new members differently? All those kind of things. Or maybe actually it's people that only open but very infrequently, like maybe you want to include those people, that sort of stuff. And do some data investigation. So get someone who is able to get into the database, or do some reports and find out what the impacts, like how many people you would be talking about taking out if you apply these different cutoffs. And finally, maybe do some more qualitative investigation as well, and actually like reaching out to members, like to find out why they're not engaging. If you've got phone numbers, for example, you could try like getting like some people phoning them and just being like, we've noticed that you haven't been like engaging with the emails. See if you can get any information from that, like quick wins that you could just like adjust to have less people fall into members on ICE.
James, if you're not going to do this later, could you give us just some kind of like industry standards or benchmarks here? Just like very overview, what you think is kind of what's in the danger zone, what's an average, open rates that might really lift your deliverability, just ballpark from your experience.
Totally, yeah. I mean, I've seen definitely once open rates started to dip down below kind of like 15% across a couple of different lists, that we started to get more of what we'd call sudden drops in kind of open rates that would kind of indicate spam issues. So if you're able to do this, I'd highly recommend it because I think it's very useful. If you can track your open rates on emails by domain, so you can look at, the Microsoft domains and Gmail and like sort of broadband providers and those kind of things. If you're able to break down your open rates by those and then get a sense of what the benchmarks are for each of those, that will allow you to spot on individual emails if like suddenly, all the Microsoft domains suddenly drop by 50%. That's a really kind of clear indicator that you're, doing something that they're not liking. And certainly, when the baseline open rates are sitting about kind of 15% or lower, then that's when I've noticed like a lot more of these kind of sudden drop type things that sort of indicate you're kind of closer to the line on what is sort of considered by that email provider as like a sort of cutoff point. That's probably the main thing I'd say. Like, when we implemented this in other places, it kind of like, it will mean that your open rates just go up a lot because obviously you're taking out a huge chunk of people that don't open very much. And so, like if you're getting like 30-35% open rates, then that's like, pretty nice if you can do that. So that's, some ballpark figures, but you've really got to kind of look at your own data and get your kind of own benchmarks from that.
And then is it really like a sliding scale? Like, so for instance, if you're at 20, but you sort of, institute a strategy like this and you bump up to 25, that you're like, you could continue improving because they see that you're delivering high quality stuff, and you could go up to 30 just on the basis of like, higher click rates overall.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, that's the the kind of supposition behind this. Again, it's difficult. You can't really A/B test this because it's based around the reputation of a sender. But yeah, that's kind of what you'd expect. That particularly, providers like Gmail that kind of like have kind of tab views and algorithms for determining which tab you get put into in different people's inboxes. Like some of that will be based on the individual user behavior, but some of that will also be based on the reputation of the sender and that content. Okay, so just jump onto the next bit. So the next stage obviously is actually just a practical thing of like generating segmentation. Now that's going to be different depending on what system you're using to send emails. Some systems might already offer something like this. The kind of, one system which a number of groups kind of internationally using has this kind of built in. But yeah, if you're able to use kind of like SQL within your search builder, or you can get your provider to kind of implement something like that, then I think getting it properly implemented into your campaigners workflow is just going to reduce the friction a lot on this, as opposed to having to have your kind of tech team manually set things up each time. And then finally, I guess the most kind of like open for interpretation part really is the re-engagement strategy. The most basic kind of way to implement this, I guess, is you say, we're not going to send any emails to this group of people, except ones that we kind of choose specifically because we think they'll be more relevant. And then you want to establish some benchmarks for kind of what like a well-performing email is with these people. So it's more difficult to establish benchmarks because obviously they're not doing very much, and therefore like you don't have as much historical data there. So you probably want to go more for like kind of fixed number type benchmarks. So after you've sent a few emails to this kind of segment, you should get a feel for a 1% action rate, for example. Is that like, that's quite good? Most emails kind of don't quite get that, but then some do get this kind of 1% action rate. And so we're going to set that as the benchmark. But you've really got to do a bit of experimentation, so you can give kind of campaigners a kind of clear sort of instruction on kind of what they're aiming for there. And then that means you can have a sort of process around kind of like saying, every full list email, we're also going to test with members and ICE to a random 10,000, 20,000, and then we'll measure the action rate. And then if it goes over this threshold, we'll send this email to them as well. And hopefully get more people in that way. Now, so you might also want to think about like people who've not been opening emails for a while. If the reason for that is that they've started to associate your brand or your senders or whatever with kind of like sort of more spammy content or lower quality content, or just sort of something that goes past in their inbox that they don't really engage with, you might not want to just take people straight from members and ICE right back into your main membership pool, because you might then find they drop straight back out into the members and ICE like a few months later, having not done anything else. So you may want to have like a program of following up with people. So you could take, every week or every month, people that have been re-engaged from members and ICE, divide them up into issue segments by what they've kind of most recently taken action on, and then find some content that's more specifically tailored to that. You could do that once or twice so that they have a kind of more tailored experience that hopefully rebuilds a kind of habit of them seeing your organization as a sort of provider of sort of relevant, high quality content that they're interested in. And then I guess the final kind of question here is like, when do you want to stop emailing people for good? Now this is depending on, it's partly a financial question, I guess. So if you, for example, have a system, I know like Nation Builder, lots of kind of like campaigning toolkit providers basically charge by email list size. And so by unsubscribing people, you can kind of reduce your cost. there's more of a motivation for that there than if you aren't charged by email list size. You can kind of like essentially sort of keep people subscribed, but just don't send them stuff for a while. And you may want to retain the ability to, in exceptional circumstances, send to those. But I think, you know, a sort of rule of thumb kind of cut off like maybe 18 months or something like that, and maybe 9 months for people who like newly joined the list would kind of be like a sensible cutoff point. Like if you look at the if you kind of look at the graphs over time for people engaging, like by the time you get to kind of like 18 months of no engagement, like the chances of someone then kind of suddenly waking up one day and being like, I really want to open emails from this organization is quite low. And so, you know, you might be wasting a lot of time sending emails with like a 0.5% open rate. Yeah, so that's that. And then just before kind of go to questions, just a couple of like sort of more theoretical ideas, I guess. Firstly, maybe thinking about are you able to stop members kind of like as they become less engaged, rather than having a sort of cliff edge where, you know, people are sort of suddenly they just stop receiving emails one day. Do you want to warn people that you know, this is going to happen to them? Because as I said before, there is a slight limitation with opens that not every open gets counted for sort of technical reasons. And if someone might be happily sitting there reading your emails but not clicking on them, and then one day they stop getting the emails. I know a couple of organizations I've worked with have reported this thing where they'll have a regular donor who, you know, is using an old email client that like doesn't record the opens, and then one day they're like, oh, I've stopped getting your emails. What's happened to that? And the member services team looks in and they can see that they've been put into the ICE segment just because they didn't have their opens recorded. And you can implement, you know, a sort of within your searches an exclusion category for people like that who specifically requested to keep receiving emails. But another way to deal with that is, you know, sending people an email before they get iced, asking them if they're still happy to receive emails. And then at least you'll then get hopefully a click on something that will kind of boost your engagement a little bit. You can always ask them to add the sender to their address book, that kind of stuff that just looks a bit better to email providers. And yes, as I kind of said before, maybe thinking again about this multiple stages of re-engagement, not just having a kind of binary category of like ICE or not ICE, but sort of some kind of like re-onboarding strategy. That's kind of it for me. So yeah, any questions, I guess?
Yeah, just a quick question regarding the implementing an email for full members, like about to be ICE. Like, what would be an example of the type of content you might, you know, say? Like, what are some themes that work?
So I'd say, like, I guess, well, firstly, just informing them that, like, you know, you care about not spamming them, and so you want to make sure that they're still like happy to be receiving the emails, and then potentially including, you know, if you have the ability to do it within the kind of email system, some information about like campaigns that they have taken part in, stuff that they've done, sort of demonstrating their impact. I guess you want to kind of take it as an opportunity to sell the organization to them, sell the kind of impact of the organization to them and why they should continue to re-engage. So that hopefully if they do click the link saying, no, I want to continue getting your emails, then they will like, feel bought in.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Great. I have a question from Jill, which is similar. What are some topics you sent in infrequent emails to on-ICE members versus content that should really only go to active members? So not so much about re-engagement, but content and topics to on-ICE members that you know, versus content that would only go to active members.
I guess, I mean, I can't think of any particular content you wouldn't on principle send to kind of like on ICE members. I think, yeah, I mean, certainly how I've seen it kind of implemented generally is like the goal of sending any emails to the on ICE members is to re-engage them, because we think it will kind of like be important. That's not necessarily always an action email. So, you know, report backs, demonstrations of impact, particularly like personalized stuff. Like if you win a campaign that they took action on like 12 months ago, you know, being able to actually kind of address them and say, look, like the position you signed or the call that you made or whatever, that had impact. I think that sort of stuff is also, yeah, really useful. And you could, within that sort of include like some kind of call to action for them to say, by the way, like, you know, you haven't been receiving as many emails from us because we noticed you hadn't been opening them for a while. But again, if you would like to receive more emails or find more out about this, then kind of click through, that sort of thing. But yeah, I mean, it's really, as I said at the beginning, there's lots of different reasons why like email addresses go dead, and lots of those reasons you can't really do anything about. Like maybe you are just going to spam forever for those people, or maybe they never check that email, or whatever that is. But yeah, for some people, like they will fleetingly see the subject line kind of like drift past in their kind of inbox, and yeah, like that is an opportunity to kind of re-engage people.
So James, if I may, is Ethan from SwingLeft. We've gone one step. We just recently adopted a program that's similar to this. We've gone one step further, which is to say we segment people into, say, inactives. We're calling them like observers and actives, and we've been defaulting to basically only sending things first to folks who have clicked on an email previously, who've taken an action, and then if that email performs well, then expanding it to we call our observers, which is basically people who have opened and keeping the deep inactives, when it was never opened an email, out of it. Do you see value into that level of segmentation? Because I noticed basically what you've been talking about here is essentially just taking out the people who don't open anything, but not any additional levels of segmentation beyond that.
Yeah, I mean, obviously you would have, you know, different organizations would have like other sort of levels of segmentation around activity. So around, yeah, kind of people who've like taken more than one action, people who've taken action on specific campaigns, those sorts of segmentation. I would say, yeah, again, this strategy is kind of, yeah, it's mostly to try and deal with sort of issues around deliverability, rather than sort of, yeah, other sort of forms of segmentation. So I don't see anything like wrong with that approach. And like, you know, yeah, that may just be the kind of like way you want to approach it and how you think about it. But I wouldn't say it would necessarily be better or worse in terms of like deliverability or kind of like, yeah, this sort of strategy.
Well, I think our thinking is that it might improve sender reputation more quickly, because we're going to send a higher proportion of emails that have 20 to 30% open rates, you know, and many fewer that are going to have, say, you know, 15 to 20% rates. Because, and that's what we've been seeing by sending this most active, you know, groups, we, you know, consistently have 25% or plus. And yeah, I guess that's the idea of like, you know, raising your reputation more quickly was our thinking.
I mean, yeah, I guess you could suppose it would, yeah, improve the reputation. I guess, so what, yeah, a couple of organizations I've kind of seen doing is this thing of like sending emails kind of like in order of like activity, as I was kind of saying before, which I guess is like one way of sort of like trying to kind of approximate that. But yeah, the other thing that I was kind of mentioning before about monitoring the different domains and the open rates by those, So if you have a system that is able to monitor the sort of like benchmark rate for Gmail versus Hotmail, then the other thing you can do is if you notice that a given email is opening poorly with, say, Microsoft domains, then excluding the kind of lower openers, so taking people whose open rate is like averages above 30%, for example, and only sending to those people for that domain. Done that kind of segmentation quite a lot. And again, if you are able to segment like that, putting that into your sort of standard process for campaigners would be beneficial. But I haven't seen other organizations kind of doing kind of exactly what you're talking about, where you sort of test with more active people first. So generally people testing with, kind of their full active list, and then kind of just going to members on ICE kind of after that.
That's great, James. I'm gonna combine two questions here and a question of my own into a general question that seems like it's on people's minds, which is again kind of back to the sense of like benchmarks or industry standards. So what do you think of as a good rate of people going from on ICE back to active? Like, how much improvement can you get from this? Another way of asking that would be, what do you want to get up to in a well-performing list? How high can you get it? Just kind of as many benchmarks like that as possible you can give us so that people can have a sense of, what the rest of the industry is doing.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I guess like my caveat to all of that is, always it sort of depends on your list. But I think certainly I haven't really seen any kind of like members and ICE emails go kind of above like sort of 1.5% like action rate. So that would be if you send an email to 1,000 people, then 15 people taking action off the back of that. So I think, that's definitely seems to be a bit of a ceiling kind of seen on that. And that, is with that sort of exceptional content. That's, kind of like Trump has just got elected. Like, what do you want to do now to kind of like stop him? Like that sort of, level of salience. I think, and, in terms of, so an action rate, like across the board, I think sort of, for like really like excellent kind of petitions or something like that, then sort of 7.5 to like 10%, like on a kind of like full list kind of email. It seems like that's unusual to see kind of like much above that for like a full list. So that's again send to kind of like 1,000 people and get 100 actions kind of off the back of that. But more commonly I think you sort of see like around kind of 5% or something like that. And in terms of open rates, kind of as I said, I think like once you've sort of started, I mean, before you've excluded inactive people, depending on how good your kind of email sender is at like dealing with kind of like bounces and all those sorts of things. So, you can see emails that start to dip into like single digits on open rates. And I take that as a sign that you really want to start cleaning up the list in some way. But again, sort of regularly getting above like 35% on like full list emails, apart from maybe very young or very specific organizations that have a more tightly kind of curated list, then I would sort of see that as kind of like a really good level to kind of be at, sort of typically seeing sort of like 25 to 30%.
And when you say you could get, let's say you got a 1.5 ceiling action rate of those members on ICE, you would then move them back into the active list? Or how do people treat that? Or do they not necessarily move them back immediately?
So generally people have just been kind of moving them back immediately. But I know, a couple of groups have been experimenting with a kind of more like I say, a re-onboarding strategy, where you're sort of like trying to sort of give them a few hits really of kind of like higher quality kind of content before they kind of go fully back into. But I haven't really, none of those have really been running long enough to have sort of like a sort of measurable kind of like, is this making a big difference from that?
So then just to follow that out, if that's a one-time email, you assume that you're trying to engage your members on ICE, I don't know, 3-4 times a year, I don't know what it is, periodically. So presumably you could get a 1% back onto the list 3 or 4 times. I guess what I'm getting to is like, how much of your overall members on ICE list could you imagine getting back? I'm trying to think about the return on investment, right? If I want to create a program like this, I want to know that I can get 10,000 people back or 100,000 people back, or this is going to be some cutoff point.
Totally.
Is that? I'd love to hear that.
Yeah. Well, I think so. I wouldn't say it's as infrequent as like 4 times a year. I'd say more like every maybe like 3 weeks, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, depending on the kind of content you got, and sometimes that might be twice in a week because you've had 2 fantastic, well-performing petitions. And other times it might be a couple of months. But yeah, so I guess, if you're saying kind of on average, maybe like 15 times a year, you might kind of like go to these people versus, I mean, it depends how frequently you send emails, but I've definitely, 2 to 3 times a week certainly seems kind of sustainable for a lot of organizations. And so, you're sending them a lot fewer emails, but you're not like completely disengaging them. And so, I mean, I'm struggling to do the maths on that. But as I say, like a kind of like 1.5%, kind of like upper ceiling, I think. But I wouldn't count on the 1.5%. I definitely you need to send a few test emails first, but probably like a 0.5 to 0.75% return on a kind of given email is probably more realistic. And I get that's probably why as well organizations haven't spent a huge amount of time like on the sort of re-onboarding kind of strategy, because actually it's relatively easy to build a kind of like basic strategy for this, where you test well-performing content into the kind of members and ICE segment, but it's quite a bit more effort to kind of.
A related topic that you kind of touched on, this idea of onboarding series. Mm-hmm. Have you seen looked at any sort of like automated onboarding series in terms of right when people sign up, there's you get one email after a day, another email a couple of days later. Have you looked at those types of series and whether they improve engagement rates overall?
I haven't. So I've seen a couple of examples, but none where there was really. Basically, at least all the examples I've kind of worked with have then seemed to have been abandoned because they weren't really producing that significant or measurable results. That may be just down to a lack of resources, because I think, most of the organizations I've seen try this haven't necessarily kind of really super committed to it. They've sort of tried it for sort of a month. And then sort of tried to sort of measure the results and haven't seen very much, and then have sort of abandoned it because it is, particularly given most of the email systems that people are using, that kind of automation isn't necessarily that easy to pull off, and requires quite a lot of extra sort of mental overhead from campaigners and people doing the segmentation, and therefore it's been deemed too much of a faff or effort to kind of really invest in. Which isn't to say it couldn't, and obviously if you look in the broader kind of marketing industry, then those sort of automated onboarding programs are much more prevalent, and presumably they are giving results because otherwise they wouldn't bother doing them. But in the campaigning context, I guess where most, receiving 2 or 3 emails a week anyway, most of which is sort of getting engagement rates way above the general marketing industry standards, then maybe it's just not as good a return on investment, but I don't know.
Excellent. Do we have any final questions in the last minute or two? I want to be respectful of folks' times. All right. If we don't, let me just say again, James is accessible. James, one question that came in that I put you on the spot for was, will you be willing to share these slides? I kind of thought you would be.
Yeah, totally.
That's what I figured. So I pre-committed you to that. But yes, I will make sure to send these around. So before you drop off, folks, go into your chat at the bottom of your screen and just go to me, find me, Tate Hausman, and send me a number. 0 is this was absolutely useless and I fell asleep on my keyboard, and 10 was this is the most useful thing that's ever happened, and I really and I want more like this. Feel free to just shoot me that in the chat here, and it's all be totally confidential, but I will definitely take it into advice. So we will make this available so that the rest of your team can check it out. Please, James is, he does this full time for a living. So you should ask him more. And I will make sure to send around his contact information so you can reach him. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, this was really helpful.
Great. Thank you.
That was great. I personally, I learned a lot. That was really useful. Thanks, guys. Very helpful. Bye, y'all.
Oh, bye-bye.
All right. Excellent.